Today we are in Acts 27 through Acts 28. We're going to be covering a lot of ground in Scripture, and it's going to be really helpful for you to have your Bibles open. So I invite you to do that. Again, having that outline with a map is going to be really helpful for you as well as we track through this epic journey Paul takes from Caesarea to Rome. Let us begin reading. And when it was decided that we should set sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to set sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. So you'll just notice here that Paul's not traveling alone. There's Aristarchus, but there's also this we, which is Luke, Dr. Luke, and Aristarchus, which is a friend of Paul's. They're going to be traveling with him to Rome. Verse 3, it says, the next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. So here in Sidon, just after one day, Paul is getting help and care from his friends. There's no vending machines or restaurants or stores on the ship. So they're providing Paul and Luke and Aristarchus with all that they're going to need for this long journey. Now, this kind of thing is unheard of, the centurion letting Paul go to visit. And so Paul must have very quickly earned the favor of Julius and the centurion, and that's going to be a repeating theme. Keep your eye open for that. So verse 4, they're taking off from Sidon. It says, and putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. And lee just means this sheltered side of an island. That's going to come up a few times in our text. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. So once they're in Myra, everybody is changing ships. They're going to be going on an Alexandrian ship, which from Egypt, we find out that this is a large grain ship. It's about 180 feet long. It's a very bulky, sturdy ship. Unfortunately, it has no rudder, just a couple oars in the back, and it has one sail, which means it's not good for tacking. They can't sail into the wind. And as sturdy as it is, it's hard to control, especially in bad weather, which is coming. On top of that, this ship is loaded down. It is just packed full of grain, and there's 276 people on board. So there's a lot going on with this ship. And if you're wondering, why is Paul on a grain ship? Well, back in the day, they didn't have passenger ships or cruise ships. If you wanted to go somewhere, you just jumped on a cargo ship. So in verse 7, Luke records, we sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, which was near the city of Lasea. So Fair Havens is on the eastern side of the island of Crete, and you'll note the repeated language Luke uses, that the travel was slow and difficult. It took much longer to get there than it should have. The winds are not in their favor, it's against them. Picking up in verse 9, Luke records, since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo in the ship, but also our lives. So here's an interesting situation. Paul, who's a prisoner on the ship, speaks up. He's a seasoned sea traveler. In 2 Corinthians, he says he's been shipwrecked 3 times already. So Paul knows what it's like to see bad sailing conditions, and he sees them, and he says, stay where you are. There at a time of the year, it's the late fall. early winter, notoriously bad weather. Verse 11 says, though, but the centurion paid more attention to the pilot, who's the captain of the ship, and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Phoenix was a much larger port on the west side of Crete. It was a large city. If you're going to be stuck somewhere for a few months, it was a great place to do it, much bigger. But as we see, they're not going to have a chance to get there. Verse 13, Luke records, now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind, called the northeaster, struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. So again, the ship has no control. They're trying to stay close to the land. Doesn't matter. They've hardly gone any distance, and they are immediately blown out to sea. Verse 16, running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulties to secure the ship's boat. That's the little dinghy behind. Instead of it smashing into the boat, they scoop it up and bring it on board. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear and thus were driven along. Now, Syrtis were these legendary, dangerous sandbars off the north coast of Libya. And on your map, it's kind of where it says Paul's journey to Rome, kind of down in that. And they had a sense that they were heading towards that, which was really, really dangerous. Verse 18, since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. So now they're jettisoning things. They're throwing overboard. They're throwing grain overboard, which is their cargo. That's the money they were going to make on this trip. So you throw the cargo over, you show up with an empty boat. You're not getting paid. They don't care. It just tells us how dangerous this situation is, how violent the storm is. They're doing now just whatever it's going to take to survive. Verse 20, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay upon us, which means a big one, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. So they're getting driven by this very violent storm. They have no idea where they are. They would navigate by the stars. They didn't have compasses, radars, anything like that. So they can't even see where they are because of the storm. It's utter despair. They have all given up hope. They believe we are going to die. There's no other possible outcome. And then things take a turn. Verse 21. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, men, you should have listened to me and have not set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. So here in the middle of the storm, an angel visits Paul on board the ship, and he gives him encouragement that Paul then passes on to the rest of the ship. We're going to be okay. The ship is going to run aground, but we ourselves are going to be fine. Verse 27. When the 14th night had come, this is some crazy storm. The 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea. About midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A fathom is 6 feet, so they're at 120 feet depth of water. A little further on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. 90 feet of water. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." So there's an interesting kind of scheme going on here. The sailors are saying, we're going to drop the anchors, but they're actually lowering the lifeboat to get on it, the dinghy that they kept from before. And Paul runs to the centurion and goes, hey, if we got to all say in this together, that's God's promise. And so verse 32, it says, the soldiers cut away the rope of the ship's boat and let it go. So Julius listens to Paul. He has such a level of trust that they cut away the only means of survival and escape, the life boat. So the story continues. Verse 33. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, "Today's the 14th day that you've continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any one of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat to the sea. So we see here they've now just dumped everything. There's no reserves. They're trusting in what Paul is saying. This is how they're going to survive. Verse 39, Luke records, "Now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach, on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf." So the ship is being destroyed, just as the angel had told Paul. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. So there's a problem here. The soldiers are responsible for the prisoners making it to Rome. And if anyone should escape, they're going to face a death penalty for allowing this. So just to save their own skin, they're like, we got to kill everybody. Verse 43, "But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan." So Julius intervenes and he saves Paul's life. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. Everyone came safe out of that storm, again, just as the angel had said. Verse 28. "And after we were brought safely through, we then learned that the island was called Malta." And this is going to be a very interesting place. Malta is going to be an island where God's healing power is very prominently, visibly displayed. Let's see how. Verse 2. "The native people showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and welcomed us all, because it had begun to rain and was cold. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. When the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, 'No doubt this man is a murderer. Though he's escaped from the sea, justice, the goddess Justice, has not allowed him to survive.' He, however, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. They were waiting for him to swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But when they'd waited a long time and so no more misfortune come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god." What an interesting flip-flop. You're a wicked, horrible murderer that justice will not allow to escape to. You are a god. Okay, but again, it's God's miraculous healing power at work here. We're going to see it again. Verse 7, "Now in the neighborhood of that place were the lands belonging to the chief man of the island called Publius, who received us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery. And Paul visited him and prayed, and putting his hands on him, healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. They also honored us greatly. And when we were about to set sail, they put on board whatever we needed. Verse 11. After 3 months, we set sail in a ship that had wintered in the island, a ship of Alexandria, with the twin gods as figurehead. So they're on another Alexandrian grain ship that's kind of just busted up. Well, they're on another one. Verse 12, putting in at Syracuse, which is on the island of Sicily, we stayed there for 3 days. And from there we made a circuit and arrived at Rhegium. After 1 day, a south wind sprang up, and on the second day we came to Puteoli. There we found brothers and were invited to stay with them for 7 days. Okay, so notice when Paul gets there to Puteoli, which is modern-day Naples, there's a bunch of Christian brothers there, and they welcome and they host Paul for 7 days, for a whole week. Luke continues, and so we came to Rome. And the brothers there, when they'd heard about us, came as far as the Forum of Appius and 3 taverns to meet us. So from Puteoli, Naples, it's 150 miles to Rome. And they did that last leg on their legs. They had to walk it. So word has reached Rome that Paul is on his way. And so Christians who are in the city of Rome come out. Some as far as the Forum of Appius, which was 45 miles outside of Rome, and others went as far as 3 Tavern, which was about 35 miles outside of Rome. So as Paul comes, he's traveling with these brothers and Luke and Aristarchus, and then more people join him as he goes on his journey. And Luke records, on seeing them, Paul thanked God and took courage. Isn't that beautiful? Paul filled with thanks and now renewed courage. And then finally in verse 16, and when we came into Rome, Paul was allowed to stay by himself with the soldier who guarded him. Whew! What a journey. What an epic journey. And I have a question for you. What do you think is God's purpose in recording this adventure? What I'd like you to do is just take a couple minutes to look over the map, any notes you would have taken, and think about what do we learn about the Lord in this whole thing, and how we are to follow or trust him. Just spend a couple minutes thinking about that. So here's some of the things I gleaned, and maybe we've got some things in common, and maybe God's given us some different direction. But let me share with you what I've got. First, God always keeps his word. God always keeps his word. God has promised Paul he's going to make it to Rome. If you recall from a few weeks ago, which in real life is about 2.5 years prior, God told Paul in Jerusalem, "You will testify about me in Rome." Well, he went 65 miles. He got stuck in Caesarea for more than 2 years. He finally gets his boarding pass to sail to Rome, and a trip that normally takes 5 weeks exceeds 4 months. And during this wild and crazy journey, Paul survives 3 life-threatening situations. The storm that nearly sank the ship, the plan of the soldiers to kill all the prisoners, and then the deadly snake bite. I mean, it's just crazy, all the obstacles Paul has in his way to get to Rome. But it doesn't matter. None of these things are going to stop what God is doing. God is going to keep his word. Paul is going to Rome, and I mean, he could have surfed there on the wreckage of the Alexandrian ship, you know. I mean, that is how determined the Lord is to get Paul to Rome. And there's something I just so appreciate about Paul, is it's how he kept his perspective on this, just trusting in the Lord. There was these awful conditions and nothing is going his way, but he stands up in front of the crew and all the passengers, and he goes, I belong to the Lord. At one point he said, I belong to the Lord, and I'm on a mission from him, and he's going to get me there, and I have full faith in him. So Paul just stays very rooted in the word of God that has been spoken to him. And there's a real application here for us. Not to let our circumstances dictate our theology. Okay, Paul doesn't do that. His understanding of who God is and what God is doing remains the same. But I think sometimes we might do the opposite. We will allow our circumstances or our feelings to dictate our theology above the truth of God's word. And, you know, of course, which tells us exactly who God is and what his purposes are, but we can start to wonder and think different things about God because things aren't going well, or we're in a season of difficulty or grief or loss or trial or hardship, and, you know, kind of we can lose our bearings. But let's not ever do that. Let's not let our circumstances dictate our theology. And Paul does a wonderful job of that. Second, God's always working for our good and his glory. In all things and in all ways, God is always working for our good and his glory. So let me ask you this. If God had intended Paul to testify the gospel before the Caesar, why then did Paul have to endure more trials and difficulty? God could have willed that Paul made it to Rome in record time if he wanted, right? Instead, he takes Paul to Rome on the seas of struggle. Note how many times the wind was against them, how slow and how difficult. And, you know, they went every which way but the one they were supposed to go in. And God is controlling the weather, right? Why is this? Why this struggle and this slow journey? Well, let me offer perhaps a reason. I think the Lord is getting the attention of everyone on board. You know, everyone has gone through the near-death experience of this storm, and they've most assuredly considered their own mortality. And in the midst of this, here comes Paul, who speaks a prophetic word of survival that comes true, that he gets from his God. He survives a deadly snake bite, and then he performs miraculous healings in the name of Jesus. So do you think the people who are traveling with Paul are going to listen to what he has to say? Yes. Surely we know that he's going to be preaching Christ dead and buried. Paul's going to give them the gospel. And he's got their attention. They're a captive audience to anything he's going to say. And for some on board, this is going to be their last chance to hear the gospel. A number of the prisoners on this ship, they're going to die pretty much as soon as they get to Rome, because they're not going on trial before Caesar. They're heading to the Colosseum, where they are going to be, you know, thrown into the middle of the ring for the entertainment of the Roman elite, and they'll be ripped apart by beasts or slaughtered by gladiators. And God, in this amazing grace that he has for them, He's giving these guilty prisoners one last chance to come to him. And so instead of gracing them with 5 weeks of smooth sailing, he graces them with 4 months to witness his power and his ability to save and to rescue people from death. And here we are. I mean, we see this incredible story and of how God is just, his hands are in everything. And by the way, tradition says that after Paul's visit, a church was planted there in Malta, and Publius became the pastor. And Paul also in 3 days planted a church in Syracuse. I have no idea how that happened, but God certainly had a plan in directing this ship. And so this whole journey in Acts 27 and all the difficulties, it reveals to us that the road in front of us might be much harder and much longer than we ever imagined. And indeed, along the way, we might question the will of God and why he's brought us down the path he has. But we can and we must trust God. His will is perfect, and he calls us to rest in his plan, even in the midst of the storm, to know that he's bringing about salvation to the world. That's what the Lord is doing. Third, we see here that Christian character creates influence. Christian character creates influence. You know, when Paul gets on board this ship, he's not revered as an apostle. He's just an ordinary guy. He's one of the prisoners. And apart from Luke and Aristarchus, he's among nearly 300 non-Christians. But even so, in time, Paul stands out among the men on the ship. And the reason is his steadfast Christian faith and his character. Paul becomes respected as a leader. He's trusted, and he gains the ear of those around him because of the way he speaks and the way he behaves and the way he acts. And Paul then uses that, he leverages that as an opportunity to share his faith and point people to Jesus. It opens a door for him. So, like Paul, I think we need to, as we are in public places and public spaces, use those opportunities as a witness for Christ. And that witness begins with our character, with our conduct. I was recently in the company of someone who was stranger. I spent about 15 minutes with them, and I was just super turned off by their character. I won't go into it, but I was just super turned off. When the person found out that I was a pastor, this person shared that they were also a Christian, and then even though I was a pastor, it was almost like they were trying to convert me by sharing the gospel. And my thought was, if I didn't know Jesus already, based on my first 15 minutes with you, I would not want to believe anything that you believe, because I wouldn't want to be at all anything like you. And our character is really critical. And that's really the beginning point of our witness is our character. But I want to say it doesn't stop there. Sometimes we are tempted to think, I'm just going to let my actions do all the talking, and I'll be just a witness in my behavior. Well, again, that's a starting point, but it doesn't end there, because if you're a good, ethical, moral, grounded person with respect and integrity, that's great, but people aren't going to figure out who Jesus is based on that, right? It's ridiculous to think so. I mean, Paul, again, he behaves a certain way, but he also spoke of his God before speaking of God's promise. He gave thanks to God in prayer in front of the others before they took something to eat, and he prayed in the midst of hopelessness, giving the crew a ray of hope and something to ponder. So, again, Christian character, it creates influence, and then we use our words to make the most of that influence, right? Okay. Fourth, we're getting there. We're moving along here. Just such a tremendous story. 4 is the priceless worth of Christian friendships. You know, we've done a lot with Paul in this series, and I think it's easy to think of him as a super apostle who doesn't need anything or anyone. He's a one-man wrecking crew. But this passage shows us how much Paul was dependent upon the friendship of other Christians to sustain him. He travels with Luke and Aristarchus. He has friends in Sidon who care for him and who provide for all his needs. There are the brothers at Puteoli who he stays with for 7 days. And then there are the people who come out from Rome to meet him to finish the journey with him. In Paul, he thanks God and he gives him courage. Like he needed it. He needed to be encouraged, and that's what he finds from others. And so I think for us, we just need to really make sure we have Christian friends that care for us and encourage us, and that we are that kind of a friend as well, who are caring for and encouraging other Christians in their journey. So this story just makes me step back and really kind of take stock of who are those people in my life? Who are these faith friends? And I encourage you to do the same. And if you're following along in the outline, just write down who are these people that are coming alongside of me, and I'm coming alongside of them. And I think of somebody just within the last few weeks, about 25 years younger than me, and approached me, and we know each other casually, and he'd said he's really looking for some friend who's older than him, somebody that he would respect and who could be a friend to him and counsel him and walk with him, and because he saw the value in having these kind of Christian friendships. And I jumped all over the opportunity. I'd love to be his friend, and he's now going to be a friend of mine and help me as well. And so we just give God thanks for the wonderful people that he's put around us, and what an opportunity we have in First Reformed Church with just a tremendous group of people to find those friends. And then finally, I just want to finish with this, that God is the hero of the book of Acts. God is the hero. It's not Paul. It's God. If you notice, Christianity beat Paul to Italy. This is no surprise to Paul. He'd written a letter to the church in Rome, the letter to the Romans, 3 years before he got there. In fact, Christianity had probably been in Rome already about 25 years before Paul got there. And the presence of Christians in Rome is a reminder that the advancement of the gospel, it wasn't resting just like on Paul's shoulders, right? The hero of Acts, it's not Peter and it's not Paul, it's God. And it's God who is powerfully advancing the gospel throughout the world. It's God who takes the gospel from Jerusalem to the ends of the world. It's God who takes the gospel from Jerusalem all the way to Rome. And God didn't need Paul. And God doesn't need you. He doesn't need me. God's going to do what he's going to do. But at the same time, he summons his people to join him in this mission. And the reason Paul was a part of it, because he said yes. And so here's the invitation. All aboard. All aboard. Brothers and sisters, by God's grace, you and I have been given a ticket to get on the boat with Jesus and to have this glorious opportunity to join God in his kingdom work and to be used by him. And what an adventure it is to jump on a rudderless ship for which we have no control, and where we are just blown about by the winds of God's sovereign grace, whatever direction he would have us go. And that is such an exciting thing, and I hope that captures your heart, and that is something that you are ready and willing and eager to give your life to. And I hope to see you on board.